How was Japan able to conquer Southeast Asia during the Second World War? This video, I'll be going over exactly how they did it in such a short time period week by week. First of all, why did Japan want to invade the Southeast Asian states? Well, to put it simply, they were facing shortages of oil and other natural resources needed to attack China. But they also wanted to displace the Europeans and the US as a dominant power in the region and build an autarchic empire, so consequently Southeast Asia was invaded. The first Japanese occupation in Southeast Asia was French Indochina on September 22, 1940. They did this because aid was being provided to China from French Indochina, so the Japanese stationed 6,000 troops there to prevent it from happening. Later on they enter Hanoi and occupy it, and over the next year nothing much changed in the region because Japan was busy with invading China. That was until December 8, 1941, when Japan attacks Pearl Harbor and with it invades Thailand and British Malaya and launches aerial attacks versus the Philippines and Singapore, and the reason being because they were running low on oil. Japan planned for 4 divisions of the Japanese army to advance into Malaya towards Singapore after landing in Thailand, 2 divisions to move into Burma from Thailand, and 2.5 divisions to take the Philippines. By December 12, 32 Japanese bombers took off from Formosa, now Taiwan, and bombed airfields in northern Luzon in the Philippines. Later on, 192 more took off and destroyed most of the bomber and fighter planes grounded in Luzon. The Japanese raid left the Philippines with only 17 bomber planes and 3/4 of all fighter planes were destroyed, winning the air superiority needed to successfully invade the Philippines. 80 Japanese bombers then went back to the Philippines and destroyed the Cavite Naval Yard as well as their entire reserve supply of torpedoes. The Japanese also landed at Bataan Island north of Luzon and began building an airbase. In Thailand, Bangkok was occupied by the Japanese as they were under military and political pressure from Japan to allow their troops passage to invade Malaya and Burma, so Thailand signed an ally pact with Japan. In the South China Sea, British battleships were sunk by the Japanese by torpedo-carrying planes. As a result, 840 men drowned. They also began invading Burma and landed on southern Philippine Islands. By December 19, the Japanese have ruined the British airfields in Malaya so much so that they only had 10 planes left in northern Malaya. The surviving planes were ordered to Singapore. An Indian division had been deployed on the west side of Malaya to prevent Japanese advance, but a concentrated attack by the Japanese had broken the lines and captured them at Jitra. Soon after, Allied troops were ordered to withdraw, and the Indian division had lost most of its artillery and motor vehicles. This was a humiliating loss as less than 1,500 Japanese troops forced the British division of 14,000 to withdraw. They pulled back to Guam, but the Japanese also hit it and pushed them back even further. In the Philippines, the surviving bomber aircrafts flew away to northern Australia. So many fighter planes were destroyed that there was no possible air control for the Americans. 500 Japanese troops also landed to Davao, Mindanao. In the south of Burma, the British evacuated the Victoria Point airfield on the Kra Isthmus, and the Japanese occupied it. In the Dutch East Indies, the Japanese invaded Borneo with landings at Miri, Syria, and Lutong. The British and Dutch set fire to the oil facilities before they pulled out. By December 26, the Indian division in Malaya stopped retreating from the Japanese behind the Perak River. In the Philippines, they continued landing in Davao, Mindanao and took the airfield. They then sailed further and made landings to capture Jolo. Further north, 85 transports carrying the Japanese army, 88 tanks and loads of artillery entered the Lingayen Gulf in Luzon. They also landed 3 regiments with strong naval escorts. Allied forces tried to oppose them at several landing spots, but they were ineffective. The defenders were no match for the Japanese and were forced to retreat. In southeast Luzon, 7,000 Japanese men landed at Lamon Bay. The Allied forces were focused on defending the western beaches that give easy access to Manila, so the Japanese landings went well. The Philippine forces were then ordered to withdraw to Bataan Peninsula. In Burma, the Japanese air raided Rangoon, removing thousands of people. By January 2, 1942, which was a new year, the withdrawal of Allied forces to Bataan Peninsula continued. The Japanese also bombed Corregidor. In the Philippines, the US had only 9 fighter planes and 4 non-combat planes, which was 7% of the air strength they had before the Japanese attacked on the 8th. American and Filipino troops had finished evacuating Manila and made it to Bataan, while the Japanese occupied Manila and the Cavite Air Base. In Malaya, the Japanese have reached Kampar in the west and Kuantan in the east. By January 9, Allied forces called for more reinforcements to the Philippines. However, it was unlikely to make it through. Troops in Bataan go on half rations. The Japanese began invading and attacking Bataan, and the Allied forces were to defend the Abuke line at the north of the peninsula. In Indochina, the Japanese sent their army to march towards the Burma-Thai border to take Rangoon. The Japanese have also been attacking Malaya. The new plan for Allied forces was to evacuate Kuala Lumpur and make a defense line at the northern border of the state of Johor. They were tasked to prevent the Japanese from taking the airfield at Kuala Lumpur until more reinforcements arrived. Indian brigades were deployed around the Slim River region, but the Japanese attacked with 30 tanks and infantry support behind an artillery and mortar barrage. The Indian brigades were smashed, and the Japanese took the Slim River Bridge. The Indian division lost loads of armored cars, artillery pieces, anti-tank guns, and could only muster a little over 1,000 men. By January 16, the Japanese invaded the Dutch East Indies and made landings on Tarakan and Minahasa Peninsula. They initiated a three-pronged attack, where the central force takes Borneo, the western force comes from Sarawak and lands on Java and Sumatra, and the eastern attack begins with landings on Minahasa and Nambuena and then take Bali, Timor and East Java. Tarakan and Manado fell to Japan and were made into air bases. In Malaya, they took Kuala Lumpur and reached the south of Malacca, and in Burma they entered north of Magee on the Kra Isthmus. By January 23, the Japanese have closed in on Johor and Singapore Island. They were stopped for a moment by the Australian Brigade in the east, but were making good progress against the Indian Brigade in the west. However, the Allied forces continued retreating south of the Moa River. In the Philippines, the Japanese advanced into Bataan. The Abu Kay line began to cave in, as 5,000 fresh Japanese troop arrivals broke through the right flank and heavy air attacks collapsed the left flank. The Allied forces were then advised to retreat to a new defensive line. By January 30, the US and Filipino forces continued withdrawing from the Abu Kay defense line. Morale for the Americans and Filipinos was worsening due to constant bombardment and malaria. The Japanese also began attacks on Moulmein in Burma and Amboina in the Dutch East Indies. In Malaya, Allied forces were ordered to retreat to Singapore. By February 6, the Japanese took Moulmein in Burma, threatening Rangoon. In the Dutch East Indies, they took Amboina and began to move towards Java and Sumatra, as Allied naval forces had been brought in to protect it. Meanwhile, in Singapore, Australian, British, Indian, Canadian and Malayan troops were awaiting a Japanese attack and built defences. The Japanese demanded for the surrender of Singapore, but they rejected, so they were poised to strike. In the Philippines, the battle continued in Bataan. By February 13, 100,000 Allied troops were in Singapore, but with questionable quality. Some were in disarray from combat, and others had little experience. British troops were put in the northeast, Australian and Indian troops in the northwest, and the rest of the forces were scattered around the island. The Japanese attacked to the northwest of Singapore and were able to breach through, forcing units to retreat. The Japanese have taken a majority of Singapore. All remaining Allied ships were ordered to sail away, with 44 ships carrying around 3,000 passengers. Meanwhile, the Japanese bombed them. By February 20, the Allied forces in Singapore basically had one day's supply of food, water and ammo, so no counterattack was possible. As a result, Singapore surrendered. In the Dutch East Indies, the Japanese invaded Sumatra. The British have around 85 planes and airfields in Sumatra and a few hundred British and local men for defense. But the Japanese have 150 planes including transports, with 240 paratroops and bombers to drop supplies for them. Landings at Bali also began. The Allied naval strike force was sent to attack the Japanese ships, but the Japanese destroyers destroyed them. Afterwards, 14 transports and 3 destroyers with 4,600 men made landings on both the Dutch and Portuguese parts of Timor. They offered to withdraw from Portuguese territory if they continued to maintain neutrality. By February 27, the battle continued in Burma. In Timor, Australian and Dutch forces were holed up. In the Java Sea, 126 Japanese bombers attacked a US carrier. Dutch, British, American and Australian cruisers arrived to defend. They were met by Japan's 4 cruisers, 14 destroyers and spotter planes which can see all. However, this ended with the Japanese completely wiping out the Allies. By March 6, the Japanese continued marching towards Rangoon, crossing the Sitang River. They planned for one division to attack through Pegu and another division to swing around and reach Rangoon. The Indian brigades were sent to stop the enemy at Pegu. However, they were outflanked and must abandon Rangoon. In the Philippines, Japanese troops landed on Mindanao, supported by naval bombardment. In the Dutch East Indies, they made major landings on Java, a west invasion convoy at Bantam Bay, a smaller one near Sabang, the eastern one on Kraga. They captured Batavia, Budenzorg, Kalajadi, Japo, and Surabaya. By March 13, the Dutch formally surrendered the Dutch East Indies to the Japanese. 100,000 Allied troops were taken as prisoners. While the Japanese took Rangoon in Burma, the Allied forces escaped heading north. By March 20, some Allied forces retreated to Corregidor in the Philippines. By March 27, in Burma, the Allied forces have only 38 planes left. The Japanese have 271. 151 of them bombed Maguey and destroyed 2 of them. The Allied troops then evacuate to Loy Wing. On the ground, Tongu was attacked. The Chinese army were there to defend with 8,500 men, but the tankettes and light armored vehicles were no match for Japanese light and medium tanks. The Chinese army had set themselves a perimeter around Tongu, but they were pounded away by the Japanese artillery. The Japanese reached the area and threatened the Chinese. By April 3, they made landings on New Guinea. There had been almost no opposition to the Japanese there. In the Philippines, they continued bombing and advancing into Bataan, which has had heavy resistance since December. They added another division to fight there. The American and Filipino troops were on quarter rations and suffered from malaria, dysentery, and malnutrition. The Japanese were able to advance 5 kilometers right through the middle. In Burma, Tonga fell to Japan as the Chinese were defeated. British troops in Burma retreated from Prome and headed towards Maguey. Indian battalions and British troops were sent to Swadong to clear it, but it was held by the Japanese and Burma nationals who were against the British and joined the Japanese. They were then forced to retreat. By April 10, the Japanese took Mount Samat in the Philippines. Bataan could not hold out much longer. More forces withdrew to Corregidor Island. 2,000 managed to cross over before the Japanese took the port of Mariveles. Then the Allied forces in Bataan surrendered. By April 18, the Japanese continued pushing the British and Chinese troops up in Burma. The British troops could not defend in Yunnan-yong, so they must retreat north. They first destroyed oil infrastructures but were then flanked by the Japanese and cutting them off from retreating north. By April 25, the Burma division attempted to break out of being trapped by the Japanese, while the Chinese attacked from the north. In Loi Khao, the Japanese destroyed the Chinese army and took the bridge that was there. Eventually, all Allied forces decided to give up Burma. The British troops in Burma decided to retreat to India, while the Chinese retreat towards China. By May 2, the Japanese captured Lashio and Mandalay in Burma. British troops had to deal with trucks breaking down, running out of gas, enormous columns of refugees, constant air attacks, and constant fighting with the Japanese as they retreated north. By May 9, the Japanese landed on Corregidor, which was the last major Allied holdout in the Philippines. Corregidor was surrendered, and later on, other US forces in the Philippines were ordered to do the same. In Burma, Allied forces continued retreating towards India as the Japanese advanced. By May 16, the Burma corps had continued retreating crossing the Chinwin River, while the Nepalese fought off the Japanese. The troops began arriving in Tamil, India, as the Japanese advanced further into Burma. Over 12,000 soldiers reached India. However, another 13,000 Burmese, British, Indian, and Nepalese soldiers lost their lives fighting off the enemy during the retreat. And finally, by June 5, 1942, we see the pinnacle of Japanese expansion in Southeast Asia. Burma, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, the Philippines, French Indochina, and Timor have been drawn into Japan's field within just 6 months. Over the next 2 years, for the most part, Japanese occupation remained somewhat the same, so I'll end the video here. I'll make a part 2 talking about how Japan lost Southeast Asia in the future, so subscribe right now to look out for that.